To give us the keynote address is the retired Lieutenant General Arjun Ray. I've discovered many connections with him. Not only some of my family, some close friends whom we grew up with in Hyderabad, studied together. Now, Lieutenant General Ray is the CEO of the Indus Trust. And Indus, as you all would know, is one of the top schools. And according to one of the magazines that leads the educational, magazines, it's number one. And General Ray has had a very, very illustrious career. And I think you've been involved in education even when you were in the Army, General. So we're very happy to have you. And an eminent person, who knows, one day you may be the Education Minister of India, the government of India. So we're dealing with that kind of a person. Let's give him a warm hand of applause. General Ray,
Dr. Ken Anakan and distinguished ladies and gentlemen from the educational fraternity, from the fraternity of those who are ardent enthusiasts as far as sustainability is concerned. It's a privilege for me to have been invited here this morning to share my views on the connectivity between leadership and sustainability. Ladies and gentlemen, those of us who are directly responsible for sustainability and for education need to understand that the nature of future competition has changed. When history teaches us, its biggest lesson is that we do not learn from history. And the nature of competition that is changing is this, that future competition is not going to be between competing political ideologies or competing economic systems, but between competing education systems. The side that wins is the side that has the superior education system. Be it individual, be it family, be it community, be it nation. That's the bottom line. And in this highly competitive battlefield, I think the traditional pattern of investment must change. It must change. In addition to gold and stocks and shares, fixed deposits, real estate, we now must invest in knowledge. And if future competition is going to be between competing education systems, then we have to realize that we have to invest in knowledge that is experiential. The problem with most teachers is that we are preachers, we are not practitioners. We preach, we don't practice, we don't walk the talk. To read the Bible, to read the Upanishad, to read the Quran is to be inquisitive. To become the Upanishad, to become the Bible, to become the Quran, to become the Gita is transformational, is experiential. So most of us end up in a talking shop, we talk, and we do very little about it. The sustainability bomb, I think, is ticking away, and this is why the Education for Sustainability Development Objectives by the United Nations General Assembly in 2002 is still a far cry, definitely as far as India is concerned, and I would say most developing countries. We have the technology, we have the money, we have the brains. We don't have the leadership. The biggest crisis we face today is not climate change. It's not gold, it's not oil. It's not Iraq, it's not Afghanistan. The biggest crisis we face is the crisis of leadership. Where are these great leaders? Where are they? Where are they hiding? Where are they? Because sustainability is about leadership. You cannot have sustainability unless you got sustainable leaders. If you don't have good leaders, you can't have sustainability. And that's the price we will have to pay. Leadership and sustainability are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. And leaders are practitioners. They are transformational. And leadership has to start as early as possible. In my brief presentation, I will address the critical leadership challenges arising out of education for sustainable development in schools in India. The front line of this battle against or to bring about sustainability has to start in schools, has to start in homes. And if this foundation is weak, I don't see much progress being made. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a lot of confusion about what is sustainability, and if you look at all the books in education, or most of the books in education, we talk of environmental science, we talk of climate change. This is only 1/3 of the problem. Sustainability is not just about environment. Although environment is a key aspect of sustainability. Sustainability is about social equity, about poverty, about human rights, about malnutrition, about healthcare, about human development indices. We seldom talk about it in our books, in our classrooms, and hardly anybody does anything about it outside the classrooms. And it's about economic development, about consumption, about progress, about GDP, about gross national happiness. You cannot have sustainability if a country does not have high quotient of national happiness. The people have to be happy. You can have everything in the world, ladies and gentlemen, and be bloody unhappy. And if you are unhappy, sustainability cannot happen. I have come across many definitions of sustainability, but I think the one that appeals most to me is by the former Prime Minister of Norway, Mrs. Brundtland, who has been a prime mover in the sustainability movement, and she says that it is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations. I would just like to outline some of the threats to sustainability with a view to draw your attention to how little of sensitization schools are doing about these threats to sustainability. I think I will begin with, of course, the social and economic inequalities which arise from globalization and from market economy. I am a great proponent of market economy, but my clarion call is market economy yes, market culture no. The sad part is that while as an economic concept, as a concept of capitalism, market economy is good, it's very sound. But market culture, which says, unlike Descartes who said, I think, therefore I am. The followers of Milton Friedman, the guru of market economy, say, I consume, therefore I am. Complexity, as a result of the growing interdependence and the multidisciplinary nature of life. Climate change, I think we are all aware of it, that there are 9 essential life support systems that sustain us and the planet. There are 9 support systems. And in 3 of these support systems, we have already crossed the danger level. Climate change, biodiversity, and the nitrogen cycle. Poverty and malnutrition. whether we take whoever's definition of what is poverty, but if I go by the United Nations definition of poverty of being $1.25 a day, 456 million people in India live in poverty. That's more than the population of North America and possibly Europe put together. About 2.1 million children in India die because of malnutrition before they reach the age of 5. And by the time I finish my presentation and take on questions and answer, 400 children would have died in this country in 1 hour because of malnutrition. 10 million people in India die of hunger. 10 million people die of hunger. In 2 years, we crossed the population of Australia, which is just 18 billion. And every night, tonight 200 million people will sleep hungry, no food. Shouldn't school education address these problems? Should schools have a social objective? Can the objective of the school only be to get 100 out of 100 in maths, chemistry and physics, pass your SAT examination, get a good job? Is that the purpose of school education? Should school education have a social objective? When we talk of transformation, how can transformation be brought about if there is no pedagogy for the oppressed? If there is no pedagogy for social upliftment and social transformation? I think we who are responsible for education need to hang our heads in shame if such a large portion of our country, despite us, remains poor, hungry and undernourished. Conflict because of religion, the controversial nature of religion. My God is the only God, my God is better than your God. That's the problem. My God is better than your God. Because of climate change, rising intolerance, and India being the home of the 11th largest population of internally displaced persons. There are 11 million people in our country who are displaced because of terrorism, because of insurgency, because of tribal lands being taken away, illegal mining, and all sorts of interconnected issues. I don't know how many of you are aware that with the population at 6.2 billion, we are consuming 5 planets worth of resources today. And by 2030, when we will cross the 8 billion landmark, and I think a large number of people in this auditorium will be alive then, you can imagine the chaos and turbulence we are going to face. North America, which is 5% of the world's population, consumes 40% of the planet's resources. 5% population is consuming 40% of the world's planet resources. I think this is a very serious threat, though we seldom talk about it. Spiritual emptiness. What I would describe as an existential vacuum. There is poverty of the body, there is poverty of the mind. And I think it's the poverty of the mind which is more a serious threat to those of us responsible for leading the charge to make this world a more sustainable planet to live in than poverty of the body. What are we in schools as education leaders and leaders of companies and organizations? How are we addressing this whole aspect of spiritual emptiness that we face today? There are some leadership challenges which, from an education front, I think we need to tackle, and I'm talking particularly in an Indian context. I do not know how much of this is going to be relevant in the developing world, but my understanding is that there's a lot of similarity. And this may raise a hornet's nest. The question, how many of you are teachers over here? Will you please raise your hands? Thank you very much. My question to you is this. Are you pro-poor?
Yes.
This is a question which I wish to put to the teaching community in India. The opposition to the Right to Education Act has been by teachers, by schools. How do you say you are pro-poor? I'm very angry about it. Right up to the Supreme Court, schools and teacher associations have opposed and fought the Right to Education Act. And they say we are pro-poor. On what basis? What is the evidence of our being pro-poor? If you are not pro-poor, how can we be pro-sustainable? I need evidence. We can all nod our heads and say that yes, we are this and we are very pro-poor. The fact is, the complete opposition to the Right to Education Act, as important as right to life, right to education, for poor people, those hungry and poor people I spoke about, has been from teachers. And continues to be from teachers, particularly in Karnataka. Karnataka is one of the leading states in opposing this thing. 6 states of our country have still not implemented the Right to Education Act. I'm giving you evidence. Why we are not poor? What we should do to be more pro-poor? Well, you need a separate Dr. Nanakan will have to organize a separate seminar. So when we talk about transformation, you cannot do transformation unless you become. If you are not pro-poor, you cannot be sustainable leaders. Please understand that. How many teachers today in India, how many schools in India today are involved in community work? I want the statistics. If I give them, you'll be embarrassed. How many teachers actually go and serve the poor? How many schools are involved in not cleaning up plastic bags, putting on green caps and sort of I am green and this and that and standing for the cameras? How many are them doing sustainable community work? Very few. Very few. If I was to reveal my statistics, many of you in this room will be embarrassed. So, if we are not pro-poor, if we are not pro-underprivileged, pro-marginalized people, what are we talking about sustainability? How are we going to address this challenge of sustainability? Unless poverty is eliminated, unless people who are poor have a voice, unless people who are poor are involved in this whole exercise of making the world sustainable, this will remain a pipe dream. The Indian education system has got many good points, ladies and gentlemen. Don't misunderstand me, but it is disempowering. And from a leadership perspective, I am a little concerned about it. Because the Indian education system is based on the Indian cultural system, which is hierarchical. All critical decisions in our country, job, education, marriage, when to have the first child is decided by mummy and daddy and granduncle and grandfather. If all the critical decisions of the average man in our country is decided by somebody else, isn't it a failure of the education system? An empowered person is a person who takes responsibility, who choreographs his own life, who is the Mozart and Beethoven of his own life. who is in charge of his destiny. And when he or she cannot make decisions on critical aspects in their life, like job, like school, like education, like career, like marriage, or when to have the first baby, and to start a family. Why is it everybody wants to be a doctor and engineer in our country? Why not an anthropologist? Why not a magician? Why not an evangelist? Why not? So I think this is a serious problem. The Indian education system also systematically discourages questioning. The Indian education system wants answers. Pick the right answer, A, B, C or D. They don't want questions. Ladies and gentlemen, self-doubt is the first step in scientific inquiry. Scientific inquiry begins with doubt, with questions. The quality of a leader depends on the quality of questions he asks, and not the quality of answers he gives, because there are no answers. There are no right answers, there are no wrong answers. There are many ways to skin a cat. We don't know. There's so many answers. We are not little praying little gods that we got all the answers, but we got questions. In our quest to seek answers, we are seekers. We don't know what the answers are. Your answer may not be my answer, sir. And of course, things like creativity, risk-taking, critical thinking are casualties as far as the Indian education system is concerned. Unless we address these aspects, ladies and gentlemen, schools and colleges and universities in India will let you down, sir. It's a long haul. This is the fountainhead. What is the purpose of education? The purpose of education in India is rote memorization. It is to prepare you for one career. Although history is staring us in the face that by the age of 48 we are possibly going to change 8 or 12 careers. We prepare you only to be a doctor, an engineer, a scientist, an architect, a journalist, a this or a that, period. One career. Succeed in examinations, get a good job, period. I believe we need to look at this whole aspect of purpose of education with deeper reflection and introspection. As I understand, the purpose of education is preparation for life. Ladies and gentlemen, a child who joins school today in 2012, going by his retirement age, which is being enhanced because of improved health care, will retire in maybe in 2080. We do not know what's going to happen tomorrow. Life is so uncertain. How can we predict what will be in 2020, 2030, 2040, 2050? Getting 100 out of 100 or being 100 in physics won't prepare you for life. You need more survival skills to prepare you for life. Preparation for life and to meet the challenges, the unknowability of life, the uncertainty of life, the chaos, the turbulence of life, and the challenge of sustainability. Sustainability is that one big wolf which has already arrived at our doorstep. It is not something which is, in dreams, Little Red Riding Hood. It has already arrived. It is there. We can see. It's happening. We're already crossing the danger marks in 3 out of 9 of our life support systems on the planet. It's already happening. It must make you an engaged citizen. Sustainability is not going to happen unless each one of us is an engaged citizen. We are citizens first, and then teachers, and then doctors, and then engineers, and then soldiers, and then sailors, and then airmen, and whatever we are. We are citizens first. And that means that governance is not the sole responsibility of government. This whole notion is an outdated concept. It's a concept which belongs to the era of nation states. In modern world today, in the 21st century, it's an outdated idea. Every citizen is responsible for governance. You can't sit back on your haunches and say, this is the responsibility of the corporation. This is the responsibility of the chief minister. This is the responsibility of so and so. We must ask this question ourselves, what is my responsibility? Have I done my job? And unless schools produce children who are prepared for life, for the challenges of life, who have the survival skills to face the challenges of life, and are engaged citizens, transformation will not happen. No. A simple schematic, what I believe would be a sustainable school. It is based on three strong pillars. The first pillar, it must have a syllabus which addresses sustainability. Things like poverty, peace, democracy, human rights, human security, gender equity. Gender equity, very, very important. Even for developed countries. Natural resource management, consumption patterns. Some of you may turn around and say, yes, we do it. But ladies and gentlemen, our approach is skin deep. And only those people who take up environmental science or political science sort of, dabble with it. And in any case, it is all theoretical mumbo jumbo. There is no transformational element in that. We only preach in the class, this is what we should do, this is what we should do, but we don't do anything about it. We are not practitioners. Mahatma Gandhi was Mahatma Gandhi because he practiced what he preached. Martin Luther King was Martin Luther King because he practiced what he preached. Nelson Mandela is Nelson Mandela because he practiced what he preached. So our syllabus in our schools and colleges need to be reviewed. They are skin deep, they are not experiential, they are not transformational. Even the International Baccalaureate and our International Baccalaureate does not address sustainability. It skims the surface like a black swan. It's very difficult to teach sustainability in an integrated manner. There are very few teachers I've come across who can teach sustainability through physics, through archaeology, through chemistry. It can be done. That's the ideal. It's very difficult. We should have systems and processes which are operated by average guys like you and me, or at least me definitely. You can't have systems and processes which only gladiators can do. So, we are possibly looking at sustainability as a subject to be taught. So whether you want to be a doctor, you want to be an engineer, you want to be an astronaut, sustainability is compulsory as maths and English, compulsory. And I would say that the theory and practical component should be in the ratio of 30 to 70. More experiential, more hands-on. We only learn in three ways, ladies and gentlemen. Whether we are children, whether we are adults, whether we are grown-up people, we learn in only three ways. Example, example, and example. a sustainable campus, is living demonstration of a school's commitment to sustainability. You got huge big campuses, but they are campuses without any biodiversity over there. So whatever is being taught in the class must happen on the school campus. The school has to be sustainable. The school must address poverty in its neighborhood. The school must address environmental issues on the campus. Academic rigor is not more homework, more tutorials, more of maths, more of this and more of that. Academic rigor needs to be redefined in the 21st century as those survival skills which each one of us must have in our quest and search for preparation for life. Character. I am of the firm belief that character will always beat brains. Average guys with character will triumph, will succeed. There are all brilliant guys who are low on ethics. The 2008 Wall Street crash which took place, and we are still recovering from it. The Enrons of the world today, the Satyans of the world today, all the brains, they are all from the great educational institutions. They lacked ethics. They were overcome by greed. They were overcome by greed. They were taken away about what Michael Douglas said in the famous Oscar-winning film Wall Street. That greed is a great thing, it's a beautiful thing. What's wrong with greed? I think we need character. When character is again experiential. No pontification. Let's see it happening on the ground. Before I go on to this, I'd like to make a brief comment on values. Most or many schools the world over have books on values. I remember when I was at kid in St. Xavier, we used to have a subject called character. And it was character, it was called it, and we used to discuss all these things over there. Values cannot be learned through books. Values cannot be learned in classrooms. Values cannot be learned by teaching. Because values are experiential. Therefore, training for values is a journey in experientiality. You can't learn values in classroom. If there is one word which describes India, brand India, or used to be one word, was spirituality. That's why we had all the Beatles coming here, and we had all the great people coming here. India is home to great religions like Sikhism, Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism. One word, spirituality. One brand, spirituality. Look at the scene today. Can we say, with all that is happening in our country today, with all the corruption and the leadership crisis we're having, and whatever is happening in the country today, what we read on the newspapers and we experience in our daily life, where has spirituality gone? Where has it gone? Definitely we have more money, our GDP is better, but GDP is not a substitute for gross national happiness. Gross national happiness is an important objective in sustainability, in character development. Critical thinking and problem solving, creativity and innovation, big difference. Creativity is about ideas. Innovation is about implementing those ideas, turning those ideas into products, into services. We are a big talking shop. Big ideas we keep talking about. Let's see you do it. Roll up your sleeves and let's see you do it. That's innovation. Teachers work in silos. They are very protective of their turf. They are very unhappy, disconcerted if another teacher or even a senior colleague comes in to see what they are teaching. We are not collaborative. Congeniality, yes, but collegiality, no. We are very congenial, but we are not collegial. And learning and rigor cannot happen unless you are collegial. Just speaking good English is not enough. You have to be persuasive. Leaders of the 21st century to survive have to be persuasive. They have to seduce you to their point of thinking. They have to be involved in things like intellectual foreplay. You have to seduce people, you have to convince them. Just communicating ideas is not enough. You have to be persuasive. Your arguments have to be logical, they have to be powerful, they have to be emotive, they have to be cognitive, they have to be seductive. Remember the 5 C's. Character, critical thinking, creativity, collaboration and communication. These, ladies and gentlemen, are the survival skills which must form part of academic rigor and should be taught through chemistry, physics, biology, mathematics, whatever. Localism is a precondition for globalism. You cannot be a world citizen at the cost of losing your cultural identity. Your inability to answer this question, who am I? And culture is about religion, it's about language, it's about mythology, it's about historical traditions, about rituals. Unless we understand our own culture, we have no reference point to see the world. We need to have a reference point. And the reference point is our culture. How many of us know our own religion? We think we know our own religion. Many of us, most of us don't know. All this problem that we are having in the world today, my God is the only God, and my God is the right God, is because of this. Those people who know their religion are tolerant people, are peaceful people. The truth is one. All roads lead to the same objective. We may follow different pathways, but truth is one. God is one. I think localism enforces personal change. When you embrace localism at a school level, it should become your lifestyle. Sustainability must become a lifestyle. I can't be talking about stop the wastage of paper when I don't practice it in my own life, at home, in classroom, on the campus. It is a precondition for sustainability. It's an emotive subject. The moment, like in the army, and I think in most of the armies, there are 3 things which are taboo in the officers' mess. Politics, religion, and women. Because these 3 subjects are emotive, logic fails, and therefore they are banned. We don't allow anybody to discuss these 3 topics in the officers' mess. It's difficult, it is emotive. I myself don't know where the line is to be drawn. I have some ideas on this, but I think spirituality possibly, rather than teaching religion, spirituality could be taught. Because even an atheist can be spiritual. Religion comes out of spirituality. Spirituality does not come out of religion. Even an atheist can be spiritual. And the most religious man may not be spiritual. So I think possibly spirituality, which is non-controversial, could be an option. Ladies and gentlemen, I conclude by saying that, reinforcing what Dr. Ken Nanikan said, that education is the most powerful, most transformational tool that we have. Unfortunately, that tool is blunt. We don't have the right syllabus in place. We don't have sustainable campuses in place. And we don't have sustainable leadership in place. And unless all these three, unless there is a symbiosis of all these three things, a confluence of all these things, sustainability will continue to evade us. And the threats to sustainability which I spoke to you about are going to keep on mounting. I also wish to leave you with a thought. The thought is that possibly time has already run out. That we have lost the race in, say, climate change, in biodiversity. Should we not be thinking of strategies on how to adapt to what has happened? Rather than trying to fix a problem which has already gone beyond, it's already in a terminal stage, we need to think in sustainability of strategies of how to adapt. Now that the damn thing has happened, how do we adapt to change? It's just a thought I would like to leave with you. Dr. Ken Nanikan, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share my ideas. I speak as a minority, and I don't necessarily think that many people would agree with what I have said, but if what I have said can sort of titillate your minds, to excite your neurons, and I think make you think and sit back, my presentation would have achieved its purpose. Thank you very much.
5 minutes just before you start.
Yes.
Seems like you read it already. Everything that you said reflected. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Let's give him a nice warm. Congratulations.
But questions must be difficult. And secondly, there are no answers to questions, please. The quality of an audience is judged by the quality of questions.
We'll give you back questions in return to your questions. Any questions? Yes?
You indeed deserve to be complimented the way you spoke. And you began by taking the teachers for a ride because they are teachers and preachers, and rightly so to a great extent. Your talk reminds me of the Latin proverb, ex nihilo nihil fit, meaning thereby nothing comes out of nothing. People who are empowered need to bring about change in society.
And to bring about change in society, you've got to change yourself first. When you change, the world around you changes. If you don't change, nothing will happen.
Good. Thank you, Sudan. Any other questions?
Be quiet, well-behaved, disciplined audience.
You're afraid of the general.
No.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, wasn't that a good start? Stirred us up and making us think. Thank you, General Ray.